I'm the one who's having a day in paradise today because this is the brand new Ferrari 296 GTB. And these are some of the most beautiful roads that Spain has to offer, where I'm experiencing it for the first time. Try not to be too jealous. Now, this is a brand new model for Ferrari, and it's not one that replaces an existing one. It's best thought of as being an understudy to the existing SF90 Stradale, because like it, it's a plug-in hybrid. And it also marks the point at which Ferrari has produced its first V6 engine in a road car since the Dino. And of course, the Dino never actually officially got to wear Ferrari badges, but this one does. So it's a little bit smaller, it's a little bit lighter, and it's only got two-wheel drive rather than four-wheel drive. But Ferrari promises it is every bit as much fun to drive as the SF90 is. There are so many technical highlights, it's actually quite hard to know where to start, but let's start with the most obvious, which is of course the all-new 2.9 litre V6 engine. This has got 120 degrees between the cylinder banks, which means it's got the turbos positioned within the V, the so-called hot V configuration. And the motor itself is making 487 kilowatts, with the electric motor behind it adding up to 123 kilowatts of assistance. There's a clutch between them, which means that the car can operate under pure electric power. It can't actually go very far in pure electric mode, 25 kilometers according to Ferrari, but let's be honest, that's not what the car's about. The whole point of this hybrid system is to add excitement.
The cabin has got some nice touches, but also a couple of mild frustrations. Ferrari's chosen to give a gear change selector binnacle which mimics the distinctive shape of the old open-gate manual lever its cars used to feature. And like other modern Ferraris, there's a cut-down information screen for the passenger to look at when the view through the windscreen gets too scary. But there's also some ergonomic confusion through the determination to put almost every control onto the steering wheel, especially as many functions are crammed onto the back of it. I drove the car for 3 hours before working out how to adjust the volume, although obviously I'm not complaining about just having to listen to the engine. The interior is spacious though, and very comfortable when you're cruising.
I've already driven the car on track at the Circuit Monte Bianco, where it was very impressive, allowing huge liberties to be taken. It's one of those cars that you can drive well beyond its limits and still feel in control. And even though that does make you feel like a hero, that is basically because of the astonishing amount of clever technology that's going on beneath the surface. It's actually on roads that the car is most impressive, real roads, well, Spanish mountain roads in this case. And that's because the electric motor is exceptionally good at filling in the gaps around what the combustion engine can manage. So, for example, I'm here in 6th gear, which is just a little bit over 2000 RPM, which is not a natural Ferrari thing to be doing. But when I press the accelerator, there's an instant response, even before the turbos build boost, even before the V6, its internals gather momentum. It just starts going. According to Ferrari's engineers, the electrical assistance will then diminish proportionally as the combustion engine comes in. So even though having everything together would actually make it faster overall, it's all about drivability, and in particular it's all about giving very, very proportional responses. There was a time with Ferraris when you bought the engine and you got the rest of the car for free, and that categorically isn't the case anymore, because although the V6 is great and the electrical assistance is really effective, there are loads of other highlights too. A couple I really want to highlight. The first is the steering. Now this is electric power steering, which is of course boo-hiss controversial by itself, but I have to say Ferrari have come close to mastering it. It's got a really nice level of granular feel off the front axle, comes back from the front axle, even without pressing. So when you're pressing as hard as you want on track, yes, it feels completely dialed in, but also at this sort of low intensity stuff, which is, to be honest, is where electric power steering systems used to really suffer. It feels incredibly natural, and the front end on this car is just does what you want. It's there. You can put it into a corner. There's no sense of slip. I mean, it's very, very hard to actually get either end to run out of grip at road speeds, and yet it doesn't feel overtired. It doesn't feel like it's got too much grip. Despite its enormous sense of stability, there's still a real flow to it, and a very nice level of throttle adjustability, so you can alter the line of the car quite dramatically, not by hooning it sideways. Well, you can do that if you want to, but you're not going to on a public road. But just by putting very small inputs, widening the line, tightening the line, and also creating the sense that the back end, the mass at the back end, always seems to be in the right place. Old-fashioned mid-engine cars, you had to work quite hard to get them turned into a corner, and then when they were turned in, they felt right. But you had to work at that, you had to turn them in, you had to then put the power on. I have to say with the Ferrari, it just somehow always feels like it's in the right place. The other technical highlight is definitely the brakes. Ferrari has switched to brake-by-wire, which is something that rarely does anything for brake feel or confidence at the limit, but in this case, the pedal feels entirely natural. And because of the brake-by-wire, it means that it's no longer requiring the force from the driver's foot to create pressure at individual calipers. So it can create more if it needs to, which gives it the ability to do some remarkably clever stuff. You feel it most on track, where you can put hard braking effort all the way towards the apex of corners and not suffer the sort of consequences that ordinarily you would. But actually on road as well, it's one of the things that really helps make the car feel lively and enthusiastic to get into corners, to get to the apex of a corner. I'll be honest, the best thing about the car is that you don't need to be driving it really hard for it to feel properly exciting. You know, yes, of course you want to drive it hard because it is a Ferrari, but we live in a world where, to be honest, travelling at 160 kilometres plus on a short straight is probably going to get you into trouble wherever you happen to be, even out here on beautiful empty Spanish mountain roads. But you don't need to be absolutely fanging it. You can be going along at a 5/10 pace, 6/10 pace, and you can feel the car working around you. You can feel it basically invisibly helping you out. It doesn't feel like it's excessive intervention. You're very rarely aware of the dynamic systems and what they're doing. All you're aware of is that it flows down the road. It doesn't understeer. It doesn't oversteer unless you really want it to. It doesn't ride harshly. It's got remarkably supple ride. Okay, Spanish tarmac's fairly smooth, but even over rougher stuff, it's impressively good. And you don't need to be taking it anywhere near the adhesion limit to be able to be having fun with throttle inputs and altering the cornering line. What don't I like? It's a short list. Ferrari's new HMI is still, I'd say, arguably a work in progress. It doesn't feel very usable. The fact that you have to activate a panel on one side of the steering wheel by pressing the button before you can then start altering functions just feels like one stage too many. And also I found that because almost all of the controls excepting the heating and ventilation are on the steering wheel, it's a bit much in terms of, I'm sure absolutely sure if you were driving the car regularly you'd get entirely used to it. But of course Ferrari owners are probably going to be coming from other cars that they'll own as well. And because it does feel very different and very alien, I'm not a huge fan of it at the moment. In terms of other stuff I don't like, there's really not much. It's a spacious cabin. It's quiet as a cruise, impressively so. It's got a pliant ride. It's even got quite a lot of luggage space in the front, up front. Yes, it's heavier than an F8, but it never feels heavier than an F8. It's maybe not as viscerally exciting as an F8, but Ferrari reckon it's quicker almost everywhere. And to be honest, it feels to me like it's easier to drive hard than the V8 cars. Now that's obviously the difference in the appeal, is that the people who want the more traditional experience, yes, they've still got the F8, or if they've got considerably more money, they've still got the 812. But the hybrids, the plug-in hybrids that Ferrari are doing, do seem to have, I'm going to say, almost a more cerebral appeal. You know, these aren't hybrids that you're choosing to show off your eco credentials. I mean, you could make that argument, but to be honest, it feels a bit tangential. Rather, they are cars that are using the technology to help you out, and using the technology in a remarkably friendly way. There are so many systems on this car, it's an intimidating spec list. You know, the press conference last night took about an hour and a half just to go through them all. But when you're on the road, you just don't even think about it, because it just does pretty much what you want it to. The other thing I find interesting about this car is the fact that it doesn't have any natural competitors, certainly not at the moment. Now, the McLaren Artura, which also is hybridised V6, was meant to have come out by this point, but that has been delayed. So we have to obviously reserve judgment until we've experienced that one. It will be doing remarkably well if it is getting close to the 296, which to me feels like a complete technical tour de force at the moment. It's not playing a different league so much as, to be honest, competing in a different sport. I suppose the only real question with this car is why? You know, why has Ferrari put so much effort into creating something that at the moment exists by itself, certainly until the McLaren Artura eventually gets to market, but also which seems to replicate in terms of the performance and the packaging and the core appeal so much of what the F8 does with the more traditional V8 offering. And I guess the answer is that they've done it because they can and because they know that people are going to buy it. To me, this is a car that has a probably more cerebral appeal than the more conventional pure combustion cars. Yes, they're more traditional experiences, but this is proof that you can use really high technology to actually improve the driving experience, to sharpen it up, to just give you that invisible assistance. It has an intimidating amount of technology on it, but the greatest achievement, I have to say, of the 296 is almost certainly the fact that it doesn't feel that that's the case. It just feels natural. It just drives like you'd expect a really, really good Ferrari to. So yeah, this is the standard, and it's going to take some beating.
So, would you buy one? Well, most of us wouldn't say no to any Ferrari, but there are several reasons the 296 GTB deserves to be higher on the list than most of the alternatives. It might not have quite the rawness of the V8 engined F8, but it does deliver an amazingly analogue driving experience for something so packed with technology. There's also the strong sense that this represents the future, and not just for Ferrari, but for the supercar in general. Plug-in hybrids are the powertrains that are going to take us through to the end of any kind of combustion engine. And rivals are going to have to work very hard indeed to be anything like as good as this one.